Welcome back to the Sports Philosopher's Rant, and today I want to talk about an issue that's pretty important to me, and that it would be philosophy. If you're like me, you probably didn't really encounter philosophy too much in grade school or even college, really. I mean, the only times I really ever saw philosophy was when dealing in history classes and things like that. Occasionally it would come up, especially if talking about ancient Greek history and things of that nature, especially with the Academy in Athens and things of that nature. But it's not really something that's dealt with in schools too much nowadays, and it wasn't really until I went into seminary that I had a really intensive study in philosophy. Some of the sources I'm going to be using for any videos dealing with philosophy, just in case you're interested in doing further studies on your own. One of them is The Elements of Philosophy by Father William Wallace. He's a Dominican priest. Excellent material here. It's basically the curriculum of a seminary philosophy program. So it's not super in-depth in each individual thing, but it'll give you a very good overview of it, and I'll give you a link in the description to that. And also, if you're wanting a really in-depth look at every single major philosopher out there, a good source for that, probably the best one, is Father Frederick Copleston's History of Philosophy. He's a Jesuit priest that did a 9-volume work on it, so it's extremely thorough on that, and I can also leave a description. But anyway, if you are interested in that, those are great resources. So what exactly is philosophy? It's one of those subjects that people, like I said, don't really take in school much anymore, so it's kind of one of those unknown things that was historically important that we've kind of gotten away from. Well, it comes from the Greek word philo and sophia, which philo means love and sophia means wisdom. So it literally means love of wisdom. Father Wallace, in his book, describes it as philosophy means literally love of wisdom, a type of perfect and even divine knowledge that enables one to judge of all things in terms of their ultimate causes. And as understood in the tradition of the Church, it is a habit of mind or a body of natural knowledge that results from disciplined inquiry and that enables one to explain in a more or less profound way the sum of human experiences. It differs from common knowledge in that it is acquired and evolved systematically, although it must take its beginnings from ordinary experience. Insofar as it considers everything knowable by reason and is not restricted to one or other species or kind of entity, it is more universal in its concern than are the special sciences. In a certain way, it includes even them and their objects in its considerations. So let's break that down a little bit. The big thing that philosophy is concerned with are fundamental and general questions of the human experience. So what we're interested here is not so much things that you can put in a laboratory or verify by history, but we're looking more at universal truths. Because when you're talking about modern science and things like that in history, they're always concerned with fact. Fact is the big thing here. When did this happen? How can we verify this? What does the laboratory tell us about that? Philosophy doesn't really deal so much with fact. It's dealing a lot more with the issue of truth and with universal meaning and unchanging norms of the human experience. So while it'll deal with things like natural sciences or language or art and things of that nature, it's more dealing with the fundamental reality there rather than changing understanding based on new observations and things of that nature as modern science would be. So within philosophy, with that very broad brush that we just painted there, it's very important to remember with philosophy we're dealing with human reason alone. There is no appeal within philosophy to the divine or to any kind of authority or anything of that nature, and that's where it really distinguishes itself from the realm of faith. Philosophy is the realm of reason, and theology is the realm of faith. And people get these mixed up a lot because I think a lot of people out there, they don't have the proper understanding of what the realm of faith is really about. They'll use the word faith usually to describe things that has more to do with belief than with faith. The church defines faith not as belief, but as an assent of the intellect and the will to divinely revealed truth. Now, I just brought up some terms that over the course of looking at philosophy, will make a lot more sense, especially intellect and will. But basically, what that means is that for something to be in the realm of faith, there has to be an intellectual assent to it, which is the part of the soul that knows things and works by knowledge, and also it has the element of the will there, which is the part of the soul that deals with choice and desire. And then the third element there would be divinely revealed truth, which means that it has to come from above. And that's why, for instance, the church defines faith as a gift, because faith, in order to have faith, you have to have divinely revealed truth. It's not something that's being done to you, as some would say, but it's a gift that you have received that divinely revealed truth in the first place, and without that, there cannot be faith. There can only be opinion and belief. But the ancient philosophers especially, and the more modern ones as well, are not dealing with faith. And that doesn't mean that they're not people who have faith necessarily. I mean, especially you see a lot of Christian philosophers there that do deal with the realm of faith and reason as well. But when they're talking strictly about philosophy, there is no appeal to the divine there. It's completely human reason alone. Now, just to briefly start with the various fields that philosophy concerns itself with. This is not going to be in any way an in-depth video today dealing with all the types of philosophy out there. It's more just to give a very brief overview. And then in the future we can go into the individual aspects of it and go more in depth. But just to start with, going with the Elements of Philosophy book there to really give kind of the main branches. You start with the basic disciplines of philosophy, which include logic, which is a big one there. It deals with how to think and how to understand things in the terms and way of thinking, and how to group your arguments and things of that nature. Then there's natural philosophy. This is the philosophy of nature. Sometimes people also tie in the philosophy of science and how to understand scientific inquiry through in a fundamental and systematic way. There's also psychology, which in modern times is kind of broken off into its own animal and its own subject matter, but philosophy did start out dealing with that as well. Then there's the really big one, metaphysics, which literally means beyond physics, which is philosophy of being as such. Then you get into epistemology, which is the philosophy of knowing and knowledge, how we come to know things, how our understanding of various things works, and how we come about that knowledge. Then there's natural theology, which is another way of saying that is the philosophy of God. This is what we can know about God by reason alone, or the concept of God. We obviously, by reason alone, cannot know anything about the identity of whatever you want to refer to as God, but this is dealing more on the fundamental questions of what we can know just by looking at the world around us and by sitting down and thinking about it, type of thing. Then there's also ethics. Now, ethics is obviously going to be a much more practical realm of philosophy, because with ethics you're dealing more with with situations, what you do in particular situations, what kind of moral ideas you have there. Again, this is one that's not appealing to divine. It's going strictly on human reason here, and you can come up with some pretty good ethical systems by reason alone, as you'll come to see if you look deeply into philosophy. And then from there, with the seminary education I had, it was basically a combination of studying each of those branches in turn, while also having the survey classes, which were more the history of philosophy, which would look at the various philosophers of given ages and seeing what their contributions to that era were, and also the greater parts of philosophy. And this is divided up into four typical categories. It's ancient philosophy, which is primarily Greek philosophy, but also a little bit encompasses the Roman era, which followed the Greek era, obviously. Then you get into the medieval philosophy, which basically is the end of the Roman era, and it's starting with the Neoplatonist type of era, and then it goes more into the scholastics, and you get some of the early church fathers like St. Augustine, and then of course the really big one later on is St. Thomas Aquinas. and there's Boethius and some others in there. And this era really kind of ends with William of Ockham. And then you get into modern philosophy, which gets kind of all over the place and where it goes as far as various people there, starting again with kind of William of Ockham, and then you get into Descartes and the Cartesian shift there, which starts the rationalist movement, and then you get the empiricist movement, primarily in England, and then you get the Kantian tradition there, which goes more into an early idealism method, and then the German idealists, which are really big, and then finally it's contemporary philosophy. This is mostly going to deal with the continuation of this idealism school, and then eventually get into existentialism, which is a really big modern one, and then contemporary, not modern, but I mean, we use those words interchangeably, but in philosophy, you got to be really careful about what you say and what words you use, because you'll quickly find when studying this sort of material that words can have loaded meanings. And then also you end up with relativism here in the most contemporary of times. But those are the main branches of philosophy there, and the main historical periods that they tend to categorize it into. And it's one of those things that's kind of it's really intimidating material at first. When I started studying philosophy, I didn't really have a clue what I was reading half the time. It felt like this is the most abstract and speculative material I've ever seen. But then you get outside of the seminary walls and get into the real world, and all of a sudden this stuff, you realize, wow, these people I'm encountering every day, this is stuff that's dealt with in philosophy, and I'm seeing these different philosophical systems out there every day, and half of these people have never had a philosophy class in their life. So what you gradually realize as you study philosophy is that everybody, whether they like it or not, has a philosophy. They just usually don't know it because they haven't been taught how to develop their own philosophical system, or they haven't really been taught what those systems are and haven't really willfully bought into one. It's usually more just the one that they're raised in various schooling and various propaganda type of things that'll shape one to think a certain way. When in reality, these philosophers have been dealing with these questions for centuries or even millenniums in some cases, and a lot of those issues that were talked about even back in ancient Greece are still every bit as relevant today as anything else. And it's really a fascinating thing, and I know it can be intimidating material at first, and some of you out there might find it really interesting and some of you might not, and that's perfectly okay. But it's one of those things that I would encourage everybody to look into, at least at a brief level, just because it helps you understand the history of human thought, and it also helps you to understand why a lot of people disagree on things, even at the national level, some cases, because things like communism and nationalism and all these different kind of political theories come right out of these different philosophical systems, many of them being the more modern ones that lead to these kind of totalitarian regimes that we've seen throughout the last century and a half especially. So if you're interested in philosophy, I'll be more than happy to go more in depth in it in future videos. If not, that's perfectly fine too. But it's just one of those things that I'm very thankful for having the opportunity to study. It's really helped me to be a more deep thinker, and it's really helped me to kind of categorize my thoughts in ways that in the past would have been impossible, because I tend to be a very unorganized person, and philosophy is basically the organization of the mind and thought. So, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm going to have some more sporting stuff out soon too. And then one thing that I also have an interest in eventually going into is some theological discussions as well. I don't know how many of you might be interested in that, but for right now I'm just going to stick with this, and hope you all have a great weekend.